Hi there. And once again, it's Friday, so we're going to be talking about our Friday focus. Why? Well, it's because we do not focus on what is seen, but on what is unseen. That's from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. I entitled today's Friday focus, My Father's Plums. I remember during my mid-teens that my father wanted me to help him plant a tree in our backyard. Not just any tree, but a fruit tree. You see, Dad liked plums, so it had to be a plum tree. The following year, we picked a few plums for our family to enjoy. However, as the tree grew, we harvested more plums than we could eat. So we gave some away to the next door neighbors and to the people across the street. In a few short years, the tree was lush and full of fruit. Its branches arced downward till they touched the ground. We had all the plums we could eat. The neighbors had all the plums they could eat. And we took bags of plums to church so that other members of the congregation could have plums to their heart's content. One bite of the large, purple, fleshy fruit told you they were the real thing. I'm reminded of my father's plums whenever I read through the book or the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew. Look closely at what Jesus had to say about a tree and its fruit. He said this, "Beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves. You can identify them by their fruit, that is, by the way they act. Can you pick grapes from the thorn bushes or figs from thistles? A good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So, every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. Yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. Not everyone who calls out to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter. On Judgment Day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and perform many miracles in your name?' But I will reply, 'I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's laws.'" That's from Matthew 7, verses 15 through 23. In the world's culture, many seem to be undergoing an identity crisis. Some identify as the opposite gender. Some try to identify as a different race. I have even seen a few who have endeavored to identify as certain animals. It should come as no surprise then that Jesus talked about some people who were wolves, but wanted to identify as sheep. He called them false prophets. Well, what did Jesus mean? False prophets distort and openly falsify the good news of Jesus' message. If they identify as sheep, dress as sheep, and even appear to speak as sheep, how are we going to know if they're false prophets with a polluted gospel? Sometimes they identify so closely with the real thing that it's difficult to determine. They're like the one they serve, and we know how closely he can mimic God's people. Look at what the Apostle Paul says about the false prophet's master. He says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 13 and 14. "These people are false apostles. They are deceitful workers who disguise themselves as apostles of Christ. But I'm not surprised. Even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light." Wow. Did you catch the angel of light bit? These false religious leaders, wolves in sheep's clothing, look and speak well. They may even appear to have a good motive and want to elevate the Lord, but their hearts are vicious. How can we identify them? Jesus said there's one surefire way to recognize them. That's by their fruit. He said, you can identify them by their fruit, that is, by the way they act, Matthew 7:16. Jesus announced that a good tree produces good fruit and a bad tree will produce bad fruit. So, using this simple illustration, Jesus was saying that false prophets, that is, those who pretend to speak for God, are incapable of producing good fruit. Sooner or later, their spiritual rottenness will become evident. Jesus used grapes and figs as an example. We have certain expectations of fruit, that it will be appropriate to its season. If it's a grapevine, we expect grapes. If it's a fig tree, we expect it to produce figs. In my father's case, we expected plums. In Romans chapter 7, verse 4, Paul tells us that we have been called to produce fruit unto God. Our lives ought to manifest the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:22 and 23, and the peaceable fruit of righteousness, Hebrews 12:11 and James 3:18. All our words and actions are the fruit that comes from the heart. Jesus is teaching that good hearts produce good fruit and bad hearts produce bad fruit. The only way to have a good heart is to surrender to Christ and learn to walk in the Spirit, so that we don't fulfill the lusts of the flesh. False prophets will bear the fruit of a heart that is not surrendered to Christ. They not only stray from the path of righteousness, but promote a selfish agenda for personal benefit, even if they say it's for God's glory. Jesus said that such fruit not only alienates them from God, but has eternal repercussions as well. What will be the fruit of genuine believers in Christ? What kind of fruit will godly leaders display? Well, here's a few. First, make true disciples who follow Christ, not themselves, Matthew 28:19. Then, use their giftings to benefit others, Romans 12, verses 4 through 8. Number 3, they'll lead people to Christ, James 5:20. And number 4, walk in love towards fellow believers, 1 John 3:14. Number 5, humbly seek ways to do good, Jeremiah 29:7. Next, they'll always act in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, Galatians 5:22 and 23. So there's lots of ways to tell. We may not know the heart of another person, but we can assess the fruit. Jesus said, by their fruit, you will know them. This is Dr. Vic Hollyfriend in His Grace. If you have any comments or questions, you can address them to me at vicsfridayfocus@gmail.com. That's vicsfridayfocus@gmail.com. God bless you. Have a terrific week.